Welcome to Luthier's and Legacy Show, a podcast created especially for fine violin makers and luthiers, as well as musicians passionate about making positive change in the industry of music. Hi, my name is Dmitry Badiarov, former professional musician, turned award-winning speaker, business coach and mentor, violin designer, passionate about creating instruments for world-class musicians and dedicating my life to helping open-minded instrument makers to keep the ancient masters' acoustic concepts alive. Today, it is the launch day of Luthier's and Legacy podcast, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to invite you to the conversations with experts. To make it a real celebration, you are getting the chance to win 7 days of live online training known as the Old Masters Tones Technique for free. You will learn the ancient masters' acoustic concept so you can create even better instruments for your musicians. Other students traveled thousands of kilometers and paid over 3,000 euros to learn this, but you are getting a chance to get this for free because it is a celebration day. All you have to do to win your free ticket is subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, take a screenshot of your review and post it on social, tagging myself in the review. This is how I will be able to find you. Regardless whether you have been in the profession for decades or you're just starting out, it's time for you to shake things up and start making even bigger impact. So without further ado, let's do it. Let's get started with today's show. Hello, dear friends. Today we have an incredibly special guest, Andy Harrington. Andy is a Sunday Times best-selling author of Passion to Profits, How to Make Big Money from Who You Are and What You Know. He's an entrepreneur and speaker who shared stage with two US presidents, Tony Robbins, Steve Wozniak, and Andy spoke on stages all around the world, inspiring millions of people and giving them the skills, the systems, the strategies of success in any area of their expertise. And this is why I'm really excited to have Andy as our very special guest. So warm welcome, Andy. It's a big honor having you as a guest on Luthier's and Legacy Show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Andy, let's get into the meat of the things. Among many things you teach is a storytelling. And you help people how they can find their why and how can they craft their story and share it in such a way that will draw people into that story and will make them want to learn and hear more. So why I'm beginning with this question actually, because when I was young, a long time ago, I remember a music authority I met early in my career, and he said, look, your art must speak for itself. If you need stories, your art is not good enough. And I was very young back then. I couldn't say anything against this. I just felt hard. I felt there was a story that I wanted to share, but I didn't know how. And when I tried, I discovered that no one would listen. And I believe that there are lots of creatives, luthiers, and music professionals who are potentially in that same place. So what would you say? What is your story? Why you began teaching how to create stories?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, the story, even in music, music tells a story. It evokes emotion. There's almost like a hidden story within the music quite often. And stories is what sustains humanity. If you look at some of the greatest teachings that have lasted longest, I guess that would be religious teachings, perhaps. It's all story-based. Humans live through stories. We don't live via PowerPoint slides or bullet points. We live our lives through story. I mean, even the word history has the word story in it. Now, there's a reason for that, because that is how human beings over the years passed on wisdom. We did it because we became expert storytellers. And in essence, we told stories of, incidents and life happenings that had happened to us. And in doing so, as we passed on the wisdom built within that story, it meant that the listener in essence, was learning what to do and what not to do based on your experience. And that's how human beings passed knowledge on through the ages. So when it comes to stories for a brand, there are really three stories that most businesses would need. That's a company story, that's a key person of influence story, and then there's product stories, or the story, if you're a musician, I guess, the story of the song. So in essence, each one of those demonstrates probably one most important thing, which is the why. It's the why behind why you either created the company, why you personally are a good fit for what you created, your personal story, and then also the story behind why you created that bit of music or why you created that product or program or service. If you look at Apple as an example, often quoted, then Apple has a story. Steve Jobs has a story. Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, who I was lucky enough to share the stage with, has a story. But each product, each service that Apple markets has a story behind it, a story that talks about why they created it, the struggle they had to create it, and how they overcame that struggles. And in the end, you've got this end product that people would covet in some way, shape, or form. So for me, my personal story, why I started doing what I do today, was because 18 years ago, I was inspired, as many people in the personal development industry have been, by attending somebody else's personal development event, which was Tony Robbins. And as a result of watching him perform and him transforming my life and my partner's life, I thought, well, I'd like to give this a go and do the same thing. And foolishly thought that would be easy, but it wasn't. There was so much to learn. And over the years, I got better and better performing, telling stories, presenting ideas and content. And also what I taught evolved as well, because initially I was just teaching personal development. I guess I kind of copied somebody else's content in the beginning, and then my own ideas start to formulate. And now, of course, I help anybody who's an expert in the area. How do you market yourself in a way that makes you stand out and have people come towards you? But then also beyond that, once you've got the initial interest, how do you convert that? How do you turn that interest into a premium paying prospect, or someone that's engaged with you and wants to ultimately become a part of your tribe and therefore a customer as well? So that's what we do. And we do it in different ways. Online programs, we've got in-person programs. Of course, you've been to a few of my, you're involved in my online programs, also in my in-person programs too. So, depending on where they are in the world would depend on whether they come to an in-person program or maybe enjoy an online training.
Yeah. So what would you say when somebody, and this is very common among artists, when somebody believes that your art, so if we're speaking about instrument makers, that means that their instruments, or if you're a musician, that means that your music needs to speak for itself. It's very common among artists, sadly. And they believe, if your art is good, then you do not need stories. And I strongly disagree with this. But what would you say these people believing that they just need to be good enough and then they don't need to share stories?
It's at best misguided and possibly even arrogant to believe that. If the best and biggest companies in the world still spend a portion of their income on advertising and marketing, there is a reason for that. So who wants to be the most undiscovered artist in the world? I think it comes from a fear of their art being somewhat tainted by commercialism. And it doesn't have to be that way. There are elegant ways to market yourself, your music, and what you do, or indeed your craft or your art, in a way that isn't salesy, isn't going to go against your values, and actually good marketing should add value. Good marketing shouldn't be buy my stuff, look how good I am. Good marketing should inspire people through, in essence, one thing. And that is the case studies, which we're back to stories again.
Yeah.
Why would you not tell the story of how you transformed somebody's life through your art? If you have crafted a fantastic instrument, and that instrument has gone on to enhance the lives of many people, not just the person playing the instrument, but those lucky enough to listen to the instrument, why would you not want to captivate that story? Because, you know, nobody actually wants a piece of wood crafted with some string on it. You know, nobody wants that. That's the vehicle. What they want is what that brings, which is an emotional experience, because we live our lives through experiences. We don't remember everything, but if that thing that you hold in your hand has the ability to create emotions and take people to an emotional place that they don't experience in their everyday life, every minute of every hour of every day, but it can evoke memory. It can evoke emotions that have been squashed down and suppressed. If it can put you into a state of, well, an altered state of reality, even if it's just for escapism for the moment, but better still, if it can inspire creativity inside of you, why would you not want to tell the story of that? Because if you just look at an instrument, then itself, it is in essence just a piece of wood, but you bring it to life by the story built into that piece of wood.
Absolutely.
Years of history built into that craft, and that's a story. And if you don't want to tell that, then you thoroughly misunderstand the power of story to evoke emotion and to move people towards you.
Can't agree even more, Andy. And of course, I have learned storytelling from yourself, and how I was since then able to tell stories about what I do, why it's me that musicians or instrument makers need to engage with, and the story of instruments. And 100% agree with you. Musicians don't want just an instrument. An instrument happens to be the vehicle for them to express themselves and achieve what they want to achieve in their personal or artistic or musical life or financial life. That's so true. And it's remarkable you brought that a story of an apple. So this was one of the inspirational stories that really inspired me for a long time. And I was thinking, oh, if only I could create a story like that would strongly resonate with people. And of course, it was at your trainings where I have learned how to do this. And yeah, it's very true. If big companies like that spend lots of money and lots of time crafting those stories, it absolutely 100% agree. Each artist, musician, and instrument maker, any entrepreneur need to have a story. And as you mentioned, so if I understood you correctly, that is a story of the person behind the business, that is the key influence, the person of key influence, and as the story of the product and each product. Is that correct?
Yeah, like, you know, just the story. I mean,
Yes.
you'll know more than I will, but
Yeah,
the dedicated hours and crafting and care that goes into crafting an instrument. Why would you not want to capture that? Because when an artist then gets that in their hand, they want to know the love that's gone into that instrument. That's what it's a story of love of the craft that's gone into creating that instrument.
Very true. How do you teach people to create those stories? Well, obviously, I know how you do this, but our listeners don't, because there are lots of incredibly talented people who believe I don't have a special story, or my story is not worth sharing. No one will listen anyway. So how do you inspire people to actually look carefully at their lives and find those key moments in their lives and those diamonds, so to speak, and polish them and put them together and craft an engaging, emotional, educational story? How do you help people to find and craft those stories?
Yeah. So you need, obviously our lives are very long, and it's not about, I think the mistake a lot of people make when you say tell your story, it's like, okay, I was born, I went to school,
Yeah.
it's not about telling the CV of your life. It's about finding the story within the story. The most important thing to begin with is to remember the story has a purpose. And the purpose behind the story is, at the end of that story, has the story evoked the emotions you wish to evoke? And have they done the job of positioning either the company, you, or the instrument as, something that client wants to move towards? Or is it just a random story that, nice story, but at the end someone goes, yeah, nice story, but I don't know why you told me. Like, what's it got to do with it? So, what we got to do is remember the story is there for a reason. It's crafted in a way that the audience or the listener or viewer would identify in some way with that story. Because what we want them to do is to feel like they're part of that story, right? That there's a reason. Like, for example, if you're crafting an instrument, it's almost like you need to make them feel that the whole crafting of an instrument has been made for them, like because of people like them that care about this, that believe in this. So you create that kind of tribal feeling that they go, wow, finally someone that thinks like me, finally someone that has been through what I've been through, finally someone that has the same kind of vision that I have. That is what we want to happen. Otherwise, again, it's a nice story, but there's no real connection. So the first thing to think about is what the theme of the story is going to be. Like, every story needs a theme. In fact, if you look at Hollywood movies, you'll find the theme is typically established in about the first 5 to 10 minutes. And it's subtle. The theme should never be made so obvious that the viewer, listener, doesn't have to do any thinking. It should always be subtle in some way. It should be inferred and suggested, not told. And so once you've got that idea, then every story needs to be broken up. Like anytime you do anything, frankly, the way the human mind works is best by compartmentalization. So just like music is compartmentalized into its various subcomponent parts, so therefore is a story. And I'm sure even when you craft an instrument, you do it in a logical way. It's broken up into different, you don't try and do it all at once. You've got to do it in a sequence that makes sense. A story is no different. And we all know the story structure because we've heard it so many times, even from a child. And child stories are the simplest because, for obvious reasons, they're designed to be so. So think of your story as an act 1, an act 2, and an act 3. Now, loosely speaking, then, act 1 is where there is a problem that's established, right? So there's, in essence, that is where there's a problem. So, for example, Apple might talk about the issue that they had to solve, like the reason why they went on this journey to create this, because they had this problem, or there was this thing that clients wanted, this thing was too big, we didn't want that anymore, da, da, da. So they paint that picture in the beginning of a problem that needs to be solved, because all stories are ultimately about transitioning, transforming, or transcending problems. If there is no problem in the story, if there's no battle, conflict, or struggle, there is no story. That's what people have to remember, right?
Yeah.
It's all about transcendence. So we have to have a problem. And here's the point. The problem has to be one that, when told, the audience will care about, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, again, they'll say, yeah, well done to you, but like, I don't care, right? So you've got to make them care about it. So the problem that you're resolving has to be connected. So, as an example, let's say you're crafting instruments. Well, maybe the story of how you overcome cancer, that might be, depending on how that story is told, but that story might not be relevant to the audience in terms of music. It might be, depending on how it's crafted. but it might also be irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to find a story that relates. Does that make sense? Otherwise, we have that issue of
some issue that majority of audience will be familiar with, something that they will think, oh goodness, that's just like myself. I have had exactly the same problem to solve, something like that. Is it correct?
Yes, but it needs to be contextual. Mm-hmm. So just because a problem we all have, right, which could be, I don't know, something simple like, I don't know, a partner left you, like somebody left or somebody died, whatever. We probably all have experienced that, or certainly will. But like, is it contextually, does it make sense in the context of the story? Like, you're teaching people crafting instruments. So if somebody passes away, that has to be relevant in the story for some reason, right? Yeah. If it's not, and then the audience will go, well, I don't really care about that. It's got to be relevant. So you got to find, a problem or a conflict that happened that then turned into some kind of setback. So in Act 1 of a story, you have a problem, and then the problem gets bigger, and eventually it's like, oh my gosh, it's like a setback. It's like a loss, a setback of some kind. So, in The Lion King, as an example, I often quote The Lion King. Most people have heard of it. The end of Act 1 is signified. Sorry, spoiler coming here if you haven't seen The Lion King, but I'm sure you must have done by now. In the end of Act 1, Mufasa, Simba's father, is killed. That signifies the end of Act 1 because it almost marks the end of Simba's childhood, where he's cosseted and protected, and his father loves him and he's his mentor and his guide. He loses him, so that's the end of Act 1. That's the big, and the problem before that, of course, is the conflict between the two brothers, Mufasa and Scar, that builds up, and then that's who kills Mufasa. And then Act 2 opens up. So once there's a problem established, Act 2 opens up. Just to be clear, by the way, I'm not suggesting that your audience have to do an hour and a half story like in The Lion King. This is all done within 5 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
5, 6, depending on the context of the story. And then Act 2 is called The Journey. So Act 2 is where, okay, the problem's happened, and now there's this reluctance to climb the mountain, reluctance to go on the journey away from the place of safety, however necessary. But at the beginning of that Act 2 is always marked with patterns of inaction, reaction, distraction, and wrong action, which inevitably causes delay, denial, and doubt. So you need to have a little piece there of like not wanting, almost, feeling like giving up, for example. But something happens. Ultimately, there in the story in Act 2, there is a catalyst. So the catalyst is where something happens that changes everything. Something happens that forces change or inspires change. Quite often it's forced change, by the way. But something happens that causes everything. That's like a pivotal moment in the story. So in The Lion King in Act 2, he finds himself in the jungle, grows up, and he's living completely distracted from being a lion. He's hanging out in the jungle. He's not living his true identity or mission or vision or legacy, based on what you have in this podcast. And then the pivotal moment comes. The catalyst is when Nala, the lioness, his childhood friend, finds him in the jungle and says, "You've got to come back." So that's the pivotal moment. So you need to find that. It's very important in the story that you find this relating to the problem, a pivotal moment where things began to change.
Yes,
right?
that's this pivotal moment. Definitely, lots of music professionals have had those. They may have experienced those moments of delay or doubt or distraction, wondering what to do with their lives, feeling like they are not succeeding, feeling fearful. Maybe these other people are right. They are not special. They are not good enough, or whatever. But there might be, like in many lives of professionals that I know, there were these big pivotal moments. Something was happening to them in their lives that, as you said, would force or inspire a big change, a big moment when they think, yeah, that's my thing. That's what I have to do.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads to ultimately an inspired moment of change, and then a decision to really fully commit and implement and do what needs to be done to live their mission, to do the right thing. I always say that leaders do what's right, not what's easy.
Yeah.
So it kind of that theory. And then Act 3 is all about transformation. So Act 3 is all about the doing. It's the small win, followed by the medium win, followed by the big win. So, Act 3 is about doing. It's about the action, right? Not just the delay, not just the inspiration, but the actual doing stuff. And again, in the beginning, there's often resistance. In the beginning, there's often like a lag time between that decision, right, I'm going to commit to this. I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to do it my way and whatever. And then there's this gradual, small, medium, big win. And at the end, and the story finishes at the end, after the big win, that's a chance for your audience when making their story to kind of talk about, here's where I am now. Here's what I care about. Here's what I love doing today. Here's what I stand for. Here's what I believe in, and to mark out their territory almost and say, this is me. And then finally, bringing the art back in, you would then finish that story by returning back to the theme. So whatever theme was hinted at in the beginning, which is really something the story explores, right, throughout the time, at the end, it comes back and almost comes full circle and returns back to that unanswered question in the theme, and kind of wraps it up with some comment, suggestion, or thought about that theme at the end. And that signifies the end of the story. Like I said, it can be used in multiple ways. You can visually, do a story and have visual images over the top for like an online version. It might be a story that you tell in a small group or a large group on a stage somewhere. But it's really powerful to have that, because you'll always ask that question.
Yeah, this is really powerful when you get that story done and you definitely separate yourself from all other businesses or creatives or artists who are just good but without a story. And of course, maybe 25 years, if I look to my career as an instrument maker, 25 years or 30 years ago, it was so much easier to be an instrument maker because there was less competition. Today we have a lot more competition. We have also factories which didn't exist, by the way, 25 years ago. Today we have factories producing thousands of instruments every single day, and they are all just pieces of wood with cut to specifications. So it's like what I'm trying to say here is it has become a commodity. And of course, in the commodity market, it's not a lot of fun to be an artist, because in the commodity market, the cheapest win. But now, if we look into an artist, an instrument maker, an entrepreneur that has a story, then it's someone who is one of a kind, because without a story, they are one per minute. Which is why having that story, crafting that story is worth every effort to create one.
Yeah, and beyond that also, actually the story isn't always just for the listener. Sometimes the story is for you. Because in the crafting and creating of that story, in the finding of the story within your life, it actually is almost quite validating, to even have your own, to know thine own story. Because sometimes we forget our own journey, but being able to quantify your story, it actually gives you that validation that I'm on the right path. And almost like by the creating the story, it's almost like you're selling your own story to yourself, that actually I am good at this, and this is what I care about, and this is what I'm willing to stand up for, and these are my values. And the story takes on a life of its own, and it doesn't just help the viewers, it helps the storyteller too.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. Definitely crafting my story helped me to understand so much better who am I, what I'm doing, and how do I communicate my message to other people. Yeah, that is so true. So what can people do? Those people who believe that they are too young or not experienced enough, can they still craft a story?
Yeah, I mean, like everybody has a story. Like even, my youngest children today, there's a story behind their lives. So I think the danger here is people, sometimes people believe that they have to get to a particular place in their life where they're the finished article. In that, like, their act 3 has to be so fantastic, they have to have, become somebody so great. It's almost like, well, I'll wait until I've achieved, and then it's worthy of a story. Well, that's a fundamental misunderstanding about the evolution of stories. Your act 3 will evolve over time. And yes, the act 3 continues. But let me tell you something else. You're going to have a new act 1, a new act 2, and a new act 3 every few years.
Very interesting.
Because nothing stays the same. Your story will evolve over time, because yes, you get to act 3 and it's all great, but hey, the world demands that you continue to contribute, change, move, and evolve. So guess what? What was working in act 3 all going swimmingly well, at some point you'll hit another bump in the road. You don't want it. And I don't want to put the wool over your eyes and say once you get to a certain place, it's all great forever. It isn't. Life doesn't work that way.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry to deliver this bad news, but there's some crap coming. Like that's
absolutely.
Life, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
so,
don't worry, because the story's going to change over time. So let's deliver the story as it is today, and know that there'll be future versions of your story as different things occur in your life. Definitely.
I'm now trying to imagine someone listening to this episode and thinking, wow, that's really interesting, but doesn't apply to me, because you are great guys, you have these successful stories, you have that act 3, but I don't have act 3. I don't have any stories to speak about. So how do you, and I know that you did that, I know that you helped people who believe that they haven't created yet their third act. So how someone without act 3, without big successes yet, goes ahead and creates a story?
Act 3 is not about you having, in quotes, success. Act 3 is simply about the overcoming and the transcendence of a problem. All a story ever is there is a problem, you didn't know how to solve it, you were basically hoping it went away by itself, or you distracted yourself in some way from solving it, or you emotionally connected to it, or you tried to solve it but failed, and eventually you kind of figured it out, you implemented what actually worked, and now you don't have that problem anymore. That's a story. So inherently, if someone says to me they don't have a story, what they're basically saying is, I've either never had a problem, or I've had a problem, I've never solved it. Well, they're lying. That's just not right. Every day we have problems and we overcome them. So remember, it's not about my life story. It's about a problem that you've experienced in your life that you've transcended. That is it. So therefore, you have about 79 million stories to tell. You just don't, no one's ever told you how to do it. So we've all got stories.
Yeah, that's very true.
Multiple stories of how we've all managed to overcome some situation in our lives, business, body, relationship. There's tens of stories. Because like, if you say I don't have a story, that's basically like saying I don't have a history. like I didn't live before today. That's just ridiculous, right? Like, what happened yesterday? That's a story. What happened last week? That's a story. Do you understand? It's
yes.
Don't get hung up on this thing that this story is this thing that means I can only tell it when I've succeeded.
This story
is tell me history. What's happened last week? That's a story. Structure it correctly, and the story can be funny. It can be emotional. It can have teaching within it. The best of all, it can have all those things built into it, and that's what makes it a great storyteller, right?
The great stories are
the best form of marketing. Best form of story. Best form of marketing is storytelling. If you want to market yourself without sounding salesy, story.
Stories, exactly. I love telling stories. And now, after having been connected with you for a few years, I have really, I'm in that blessed place where I can craft and create stories around what I do, my instruments, about my services and products, how I train other instrument makers to create instruments or design instruments or sell instruments. This is a powerful stuff, and I'm a big fan of storytelling. And I became a big fan of storytelling actually a long time ago. And I'll share a little story how I came up to this. This was a very low moment in my life, actually. I was in Tokyo, 2006 or 7, and I was trying to organize my own concerts. And I've put a lot of effort in getting people into my concert hall. And after having distributed 25 kilograms of posters all around the city of Tokyo, beautiful venues and theaters and cafes around these venues and CD shops everywhere, I felt really inspired. I expected there would be a lot of people in the concert hall. So I walk on stage, beautiful stage, by the way. It's one of the most beautiful venues in Tokyo, at Tokyo Opera City, and I expected to see a hall full of audience. As I walk on stage, I see just 5 people there. That was a big screw up, Andy. And I began. Why it happened? Well, because I had no idea about how to market and how to put people in the concert hall. So I've made lots of mistakes, and I was targeting completely wrong people. And this is exactly why it happened. But anyway, there I was on stage. There were these 5 ladies in the concert hall. I started playing and I felt terrible. I thought, what the hell am I doing here? So I stopped playing after a couple of minutes after I finished the first piece. And I thought, well, I'll tell them a story. And then I played another piece and I shared another story. And then I shared a few stories. After the performance, they rushed to the artist room to say how much they enjoyed it. And nobody said anything about playing or music or instruments, anything, but they all had tons of comments on stories of my personal life, childhood connection with music and what it meant. And that was not a story created in any strategic way. Those were just stories. But that was the moment when I understood what was important to these people and why what kind of stories they resonated with. So I started sharing more of those stories. And these 5 people in the concert hall eventually grew to 350 people in the concert hall. Big difference. Very,
wow.
very
well,
big
difference. In the same performance, it got bigger, or over time?
Over time, yeah, over time. Yes, over time. So it made a huge difference. Of course, this storytelling makes a giant difference when it comes to crafting instruments. So instrument makers definitely do need that kind of story. So this is why, guys, I'm really so excited to have Andy here with us on Luthier's and Legacy podcast. And if you want to learn more about how to create stories, definitely need to find his book, Passion to Profit, because he has taught tens of thousands of people how to turn their passion into profits. And storytelling is a very, very big part of this. As Andy said, that if you don't want to sound salesy, tell stories.
Yeah, we do actually. I mean, we do actually have a program called Storytelling Secrets, which is a program designed to help people to actually do exactly that, in how to build stories. Yeah. So we could probably find a way to get them an opportunity to see if that's something they want to do. Perhaps.
Definitely, we will put links in the description of this podcast where they can find more about this program as well. The moment I met you, Andy, it was a couple of years ago in Amsterdam. The moment you started speaking, I immediately felt that is the guy, because I was looking for somebody to teach me how to tell stories and teach me how to speak on stage, because I've always wanted to do this. So, and of course, storytelling was a giant part of your presentation.
Yeah, well, I enjoy it. If you enjoy it, that comes through in your performance. I guess that's the same as music too. Somebody
listening to this and they're thinking storytelling is important. Yes, you need a story, you need to be able to share what is so special about you or about your service, about music, your product, or instruments. And they might be feeling like, but I'm too shy on camera, I cannot speak, I'm not a speaker. So do I have to be a speaker in order to share a story? what would you recommend these people feeling that they are not speakers and they are too shy to share a story?
But we're always, in essence, telling stories because, you know, I mean, how many times have you met someone and say, "Hey, how'd you get on? What'd you get up to this weekend?" You're telling a story. So it's something we do, but it's like any skill, it can be learned. I'm actually an introvert personally, so I naturally would spend more time by myself and less with people, because I think I was probably meant to be more of an extrovert. I was definitely very extrovert until my parents split up when I was 13. And at that moment, I ended up spending quite a lot of time by myself. So I think I had a lot of thinking to do and a lot of feeling to do for my teenage years. And that's where that more introverted side of me got overdeveloped. But I didn't realize at that point in time, obviously you never do, what a gift that would be, because it makes me a deep thinker. So if you are introverted, in fact, interestingly, many of the best presenters and speakers are actually introverted, because that's how they're able to craft such deep, meaningful story, because, you know, they're good at thinking. You can switch it on, but there are techniques to do that. It's a little bit like if they are an instrument player. It's like if you're very good at what you do it unconsciously, which means you get into the zone of high performance. So if someone knows how to get into the zone of high performance when they're playing an instrument, they do know how to get to the zone of high performance also presenting too. It's actually the same state. It's just that they're not following the same internal processes when they're speaking as when they're playing an instrument. So we can teach them that, how to get into the zone of high performance. That's something we can all do, but it's actually a no thinking state, which is interesting because, again, if you overthink the music or overthink the words to the song, you'll typically get it wrong. You end up questioning yourself almost. It's the same with presenting and public speaking, because language, or more important, fluency in any language, provides it needs a no thinking state. So if you think too much about what you're going to say before you say it, you'll actually mess it up. So it's a bit like this conversation. It's not scripted. So here's a good little technique that people can utilize. You and I today, this interview has had two parts to it. Someone's asked questions, mostly yourself, and I've answered those questions. Now, I didn't prepare the answers, but I didn't need to, because the story, the content, the ideas, they're already inside. The quality of your questions brings that out in me. So when you're doing a story, it's the same. So you can have little questions built into your story, and those questions evoke an answer. So and you do them rhetorically. So for example, in the story, something might happen, and then you say, so what was I to do? What was I to do next? And that's it. And then that becomes like a touching point in the story. It's like a place in the story you get to, and then that place opens up the next part of the story, for example. So again, it's something we teach in the Storytelling Secrets and other programs we run, so that people don't get overwhelmed by, oh, there's just so much to remember.
Yeah.
And also remember, the other thing, again, which is very specific to storytelling, is storytelling is visual. So in essence, what you're really doing, if you think about it, is when you're telling a story, you as the storyteller should be in the memory of that story in your head. Like you're there, you go back, you transport yourself back in time to the place you're at, and you literally are inside a scene at that moment in time, right? So it's all around you, 360 degrees, you're right back there in time. And you should also be able to go back and access the emotion that you were feeling at that moment in time too. So by anchoring in the emotion, by you stepping into that state and stepping into that environment of where you were, all you then have to do is get the audience to see what you can see and to feel what you can feel. That's the key.
Wonderful.
Because you want them to have the same experience that you're having, right? So if you can, because stories aren't told, they're relived.
Yeah.
So you go back in time, you go back into the emotion, you go back into the place in your mind, and you transport the audience there to that time and that space, and you evoke the same emotion for them. You evoke the same visual imagery, and you do that by how you then craft the story. What do you say? So we always use what we call save the scene strategy, SAVE. S for what smells. Now, there may nothing to refer to smells, but could you refer to how it smelt? Auditory for A, V for visual, E for emotion. And so you've got to get the audience, because the mistake a lot of presenters, speakers, storytellers make is they will talk about what happened in that scene, but they miss the two most important things, which are the visual description of the scene and the emotion of that scene. Once you do that, then the audience are having the same experience as you on stage. Otherwise, you might be enjoying the story, but they're dissociated from it. So if you think about it, story becomes much easier to tell when all you're doing, in essence, is going back in time, describing a scene, and then going into an emotion, and then describing the dialogue that might have happened in that scene. Then the story comes to life. But if you don't do that, and all you do is you just narrate something without doing all that, story's pretty flat and pretty boring.
True. So people need to relive the story, activate all the senses, because if they don't do this, then the audience is listening to the story, but they are listening to it in a dissociated state. So to get them really into the story, it is important, as I said, to save the scene and speak about all of the senses, what it smelled like, if there were smells, what it looked like, auditory, or sounded like, visual, what it looked like, and emotional, how they felt, so that the audience really connects with, and the storyteller can have a conversation with himself or herself to facilitate this this act of creating a story on stage or on a video. Wonderful. Andy, thank you so much. One last question. What legacy would you like to leave? What do you want to be?
I think that's pretty simple, really. You know, the legacy I'd like to leave is to be remembered, like in a fond way. That is it. I think, you know, like, how many years will it be until, you know, your name is not mentioned anymore? You know, like, that's it. You know, how long is your name remembered? So, you know, the greatest teachers of our time, the greatest change makers, their name will probably live on for some time. But for the majority of people, their name is probably forgotten pretty quickly. So I guess that's it. Thanks for inviting me on, mate. I really enjoyed it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom. Really appreciate that. And I hope our audience enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Do let us know what did you like about today's show, and do let us know what would you like us to cover in the future episodes. Remember, today it is a very special day. It is the launch day of Luthier's and Legacy podcast. And to make it a real celebration, I'm willing to offer you the chance to win a free ticket to my iconic training known as the Old Master's Tones Technique. Over the course of 7 days, 4 sessions, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know in order to design instruments with ease, flow, and freedom using the ancient masters' knowledge documented in a number of historical sources and documents. All you need to do in order to win your free ticket is subscribe to Luthier's and Legacy podcast, leave a review on any one episode, take a screen print of your review and post it on social with tagging my name in your review. This is how I will be able to find your review. So it is super easy. Remember, there are just 20 spots available. That means that most likely you have to write your review right now and post it on social, tagging Dimitri Badiarov in your post. That is all for today's episode. I'm really looking forward to inviting you to the next conversation with the next expert. I'm really excited about this. Really looking forward to sharing with you a lot more. Take care and see you very soon.